There is a reason some people walk through devastating loss and somehow rise wiser, steadier, and more at peace, while others endure far less and remain bitter for the rest of their lives. The difference was never the size of the storm. The difference is what they understood while standing inside it. Every single one of us is walking through a classroom we never enrolled in. Some days the lessons feel gentle, a quiet morning, an answered prayer, a season of unexpected favor that makes you believe everything is finally falling into place. And other days, the lessons feel almost unbearable, loss that arrives without warning, doors that close no matter how hard you push, silence from heaven exactly when you needed a voice the most. But here is something I need you to sit with this morning, before we go any further. Every season, the gentle ones and the brutal ones, is teaching you something. And the seasons that hurt the most are very often the ones teaching you the most. This is not a comfortable truth. It is not the kind of message that fits neatly on a motivational graphic. But comfort was never the point of wisdom. Truth was the point. And today, we are going to walk through 6 harsh truths, 6 lessons woven into the very fabric of how life and faith and seasons operate, that, once understood, have the power to completely reorganize the way you experience everything that happens to you from this moment forward. Listen to this every morning if you need to. Let it settle into you slowly, the way truth always does. Because what we are about to walk through is not meant to simply inform you. It is meant to transform you. Let's begin. Truth 1, nothing is wasted, even the years that felt wasted. There is a story, ancient and timeless, of a young man named Joseph, who was sold into slavery by the very brothers who should have protected him. He spent years in a foreign land, stripped of his home, his family, his identity, his future, all of it taken in a single, devastating betrayal. And just when life seemed to offer him a measure of stability, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison for a crime he did not commit. Imagine that for a moment. Not a season of difficulty. Years. Years of his one and only life, spent in chains and in cells, watching the days disappear into a darkness that offered no explanation and no timeline for relief. If you had asked Joseph, in the middle of that prison cell, whether his life had meaning, whether any of what was happening to him served a purpose, I imagine the honest answer, in the rawest moments, would have been no. It would have felt wasted. Pointless. Cruel. And yet, years later, when Joseph stood in a position of extraordinary power, when he held in his hands the very fate of the brothers who betrayed him, he said something that has echoed across centuries: what was meant for harm was being used for a greater good. Here is the harsh truth woven into that story. The years that feel wasted are very often the years being used the most. The prison cell becomes a training ground. The betrayal becomes the very thing that builds the character required for what is coming. The waiting, the agonizing, unexplained, seemingly pointless waiting, becomes the soil in which something is growing that could not have grown any other way. This is harsh because it does not offer the comfort of an explanation in real time. You will not always understand, while you are in the season, what the season is producing in you. The growth is often invisible until long after the season has passed. But nothing, not the wasted year, not the closed door, not the silent prayer, is actually wasted. It is being used. Slowly. Quietly. In ways you will not understand until you are standing far enough away to see the whole picture. Truth 2, silence is not always absence. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from praying into what feels like an empty room. You speak. You ask. You plead, sometimes, with everything in you. And what comes back is nothing. No clear answer. No sign. No shift in circumstances that tells you anyone heard you at all. This silence is one of the hardest experiences a human being can walk through, because silence, to our human minds, often feels indistinguishable from abandonment. But here is the harsh truth: silence is not always absence. There is an old story of a prophet named Elijah, a man who had just witnessed one of the most dramatic, undeniable displays of divine power in recorded history, fire falling from the sky in front of an entire nation. And yet, almost immediately after this victory, Elijah found himself exhausted, afraid, and so spiritually depleted that he asked to die. He fled into the wilderness. And there, in his lowest moment, he expected to encounter God in the way he always had, in the dramatic, the powerful, the unmistakable. A great wind tore through the mountains. God was not in the wind. An earthquake shook the ground. God was not in the earthquake. A fire blazed across the landscape. God was not in the fire. And then, after all the dramatic displays had passed, there came a sound the old translations call a still, small voice. A whisper. Almost nothing at all. That was where the presence was found. I want you to sit with the weight of that. The most significant encounter in this man's darkest moment did not come through noise, through spectacle, through the kind of unmistakable sign he was desperately hoping for. It came through near silence. This is the harsh truth about the seasons when heaven feels quiet. Silence is very often not the absence of presence. It is the presence operating in a register too subtle for our noise-accustomed ears to immediately recognize. We want fire. We want wind. We want the dramatic intervention that removes all doubt. But growth, real, deep, transformative growth, often happens in the whisper. In the waiting room. In the season where nothing seems to be happening, and yet everything that matters is being formed. Stop interpreting silence as absence. Start listening for the whisper underneath it. Truth 3, the refining fire is not punishment, it is preparation. Nobody enjoys the furnace. There is no version of difficulty, no framing of hardship, no spiritual perspective sophisticated enough to make genuine suffering feel pleasant while you are inside it. Anyone who tells you that pain should feel good has never actually been in real pain. But there is a harsh truth buried inside the furnace that changes everything once you understand it. The fire is not there to destroy you. It is there to refine you. There is an old metallurgical practice, used for centuries before modern technology made it largely obsolete, where silversmiths would hold raw silver over an open flame, heating it until it reached a molten state. As the silver heated, the impurities within it, the dross, the imperfections, the elements that did not belong, would rise to the surface, where the silversmith could skim them away. This process would be repeated. Again and again. Heat, impurity rising, skimming, heat again. Each cycle through the fire removed more of what didn't belong and left more of what was pure. Here is the detail of this practice that has been told and retold for generations. The silversmith never walked away from the fire. Not for a moment. Because silver left in the flame even a few seconds too long would be destroyed entirely. The process required complete presence, complete attention, the silversmith's eyes fixed on the silver the entire time. And how did the silversmith know the process was complete? When he could see his own reflection in the surface of the silver. I want you to feel the weight of that image, because it is one of the most beautiful pictures of suffering I have ever encountered. The fire in your life, the hardship, the loss, the seasons that feel like they are burning away everything you thought you could rely on, is not random. It is not punishment. It is not evidence of abandonment. It is refinement. And refinement requires presence. The same presence that allows the fire to do its work is the presence that never once looks away from you while it happens. The harsh truth is this: you cannot become who you are meant to become without the fire. There is no shortcut to purity. There is no version of becoming that bypasses the heat. But the comfort buried inside the harsh truth is this: the fire has an eye on it the entire time. And the fire stops, not when you've suffered enough to satisfy some cruel requirement, but when what's pure in you finally reflects back clearly. A short word before we continue. I want to pause here for a moment, because I know that what we have walked through so far is not light. These are not easy truths. They are not meant to be received casually, the way you might scroll past a quote that sounds nice but asks nothing of you. These truths ask something of you. They ask you to reconsider the years you have labeled as wasted. They ask you to listen differently to the silence you have interpreted as absence. They ask you to stop resisting the fire and start trusting the presence that never once looked away from it. This is hard work. Spiritual maturity is always hard work. There is no version of deep transformation that arrives without cost. But you are still here. Still listening. Still willing to sit with truths that don't flatter you but instead refine you. That, in itself, tells me something about the season you are walking. We left off in a place of stillness, sitting with the truth that the fire in your life is not punishment, but preparation. That nothing, not even the years that felt wasted, was ever truly wasted. Now we go deeper. Because the next three truths are, in many ways, the ones that ask the most of us. They are the truths that confront our most stubborn assumptions about how life is supposed to work, what fairness is supposed to look like, and what it actually means to trust something larger than our own understanding. Let's continue. Truth 4, some doors close because they were never meant to open. There is a particular grief that comes from a door closing, especially a door you were certain was meant for you. You prepared for it. You believed for it. You poured years of hope into the version of your life that existed behind that door. And when it shut, sometimes slowly, sometimes without warning, something inside you didn't just experience disappointment. It experienced confusion. Why would this be allowed to happen if it wasn't meant for me? Here is a harsh truth that took me a long time to understand, and that I suspect will take you time as well. Closed doors are not always tragedies. Some of them are protections. There is an old story of a man named David, anointed as future king while he was still a boy tending sheep in obscurity. You would think that anointing meant an immediate, smooth path to the throne. It did not. Instead, David spent years, many of them, running. Hiding in caves. Fleeing from a jealous king who wanted him dead. Every door that should have logically opened for an anointed future king instead seemed to close, again and again, leaving him in hardship, exile, and uncertainty that stretched on for the better part of a decade. If David had been given the throne the moment he was anointed, untested, unrefined, still carrying the impulsiveness and unchecked ego of a teenager who had just defeated a giant, historians and theologians alike have long observed that the kingdom likely would have collapsed under him. The years in the wilderness were not a delay of the promise. They were the preparation required for the promise to be sustainable once it finally arrived. Some doors close because walking through them too early would have destroyed you. The job you didn't get may have cost you your integrity. The relationship that ended may have cost you your identity. The opportunity that fell through may have placed you in a position you were not yet equipped to carry, not because you lacked worth, but because you had not yet finished becoming who that opportunity actually required. This is harsh because it asks you to trust the closing of a door without being shown what was behind it. It asks you to believe, without proof, without explanation, often without comfort, that the closed door was an act of protection rather than rejection. But every person who has lived long enough to look back on their own story can usually point to at least one door that, in hindsight, they are deeply grateful never opened. Trust the doors you cannot see behind. Some of them were closed by a love wiser than your disappointment. Truth 5, comparison will cost you the very thing you're chasing. There is a particular kind of suffering unique to our era, though its roots stretch back to the earliest chapters of human history. It is the suffering of watching someone else's season and measuring your own against it. Their breakthrough seems faster. Their relationship looks easier. Their finances seem more stable. Their joy seems more constant. And somewhere in the quiet comparison, the scrolling, the watching, the silent measuring, something in you begins to wither. Not because your season is actually worse, but because you have stopped experiencing your own season and started experiencing only the gap between it and someone else's. There is an old story of two men, Cain and Abel, brothers who each brought an offering. Abel's offering was received with favor. Cain's was not. And in the moment that should have prompted reflection, what do I need to adjust, what do I need to understand, Cain instead turned his attention entirely toward his brother. He did not ask, what is wrong with my offering? He asked, why does he have what I don't? And that single shift, from self-examination to comparison, set in motion one of the oldest and most devastating tragedies recorded in human history. I want you to notice something about that story, because it carries a harsh truth that is easy to miss. The problem was never that Abel had something. The problem was that Cain could not be at peace with his own path while looking at someone else's. This is the harsh truth about comparison: it does not simply steal your joy. It blinds you to your own instructions. While you are busy measuring your harvest against someone else's, you stop tending the field that was actually given to you. The energy spent in comparison is energy stolen directly from the work, the growth, and the becoming that your own specific season requires. Every person's season operates on a different timeline, under different conditions, producing a different kind of fruit, for a different kind of purpose. The moment you import someone else's timeline as the measuring stick for your own life, you guarantee one outcome: dissatisfaction, regardless of how much progress you are actually making. Stop watching their field. Tend yours. The harvest you are meant to carry was never going to look like anyone else's. And the comparison you indulge in today is very often the very thing standing between you and the fullness of what is already growing, quietly, in your own ground. Truth 6. Surrender is not weakness, it is the final form of strength. We arrive, now, at the hardest truth of all. The one that every other truth in this message has been quietly building toward. Surrender. In a culture that worships control, that measures strength by how tightly you can grip your circumstances, how aggressively you can force outcomes, how relentlessly you can will your way through resistance, surrender sounds like defeat. It sounds like giving up. It sounds like the opposite of everything we have been taught to admire. But there is an old story, perhaps the most quietly powerful story ever recorded, of a man in a garden, on the night before the most significant suffering of his life, praying with such intensity that it is described as sweating drops of blood. And in that moment of unimaginable dread, facing a suffering he did not want, he prayed a single sentence that has echoed across 2,000 years of human history. "Not my will, but yours be done." That sentence is not weakness. That sentence is the most powerful act of strength a human being can perform. Because surrender is not the absence of desire. It is not pretending you don't want what you want, or that the pain you are facing doesn't genuinely hurt. Surrender is choosing, in the full, conscious presence of your own desires, your own fears, your own preferences, to release your grip on outcomes you cannot control, and trust something larger than your own limited understanding. This is the harshest truth of all 6, because it asks you to release the one thing the human ego clings to most desperately: control. You will face seasons where the only path forward is surrender. Not passivity. Not resignation. Not the empty shrug of someone who has stopped caring. But the active, deliberate, courageous surrender of someone who has examined their circumstances honestly, done everything within their power, and then, consciously, intentionally, released what was never theirs to control in the first place. This is where peace actually lives. Not in the illusion of total control. Not in the exhausting effort of forcing every outcome to bend to your will. But in the quiet, settled strength of someone who has finally stopped fighting the current and started trusting the river. Surrender is not the end of your strength. It is the final, most mature form it can take. Bringing it all together. 6 harsh truths. Let me bring them together for you now, not as separate lessons, but as one continuous thread woven through every season you will ever walk through. Nothing is wasted, even the years that felt pointless while you were living them. Silence is not abandonment, it is often present, speaking in a register too quiet for noisy hearts to catch. The fire in your life is refinement, not punishment, and the eyes watching over it never once looked away. Some doors close because walking through them would have cost you more than you could have survived. Comparison will rob you of the very harvest growing quietly in your own field. And surrender, true, active, courageous surrender, is not weakness, but the highest, most mature expression of strength available to any human being. These 6 truths will not make your seasons painless. They were never meant to. But they will give you something far more valuable than painlessness. They will give you perspective. And perspective, the ability to see your hardship not as random cruelty but as part of a larger, patient, purposeful process, is what allows a person to walk through fire without being consumed by it. Listen to this every morning if you need to. Let these 6 truths settle into the soil of your understanding slowly, the way real transformation always happens, not overnight, not through a single dramatic revelation, but through the patient, repeated return to truth, morning after morning, until it becomes the lens through which you see everything. Your season, whatever it looks like right now, is not random. It is not wasted. It is not abandonment. It is preparation. It is refinement. It is protection. It is an invitation to stop comparing and start tending. And ultimately, it is an invitation to surrender what was never yours to control. Walk through it with open eyes. If this message reached something in you this morning, if these 6 truths gave language to a season you have been walking through in silence, I want you to know that this is exactly the kind of conversation we have, week after week, here on the Stoic Path. We don't do shallow here. We don't do easy answers wrapped in pretty language that asks nothing of you. We go to the real places, the places where truth is harsh before it is healing, where growth requires fire, where strength sometimes looks like surrender. If that is the kind of content that speaks to where you are right now, subscribe to the Stoic Path. Hit that button. Turn on your notifications. Because there is more of this waiting for you, more truths, more perspective, more of the honest, deep, transformative conversation that most content is too afraid to have. Share this with someone walking through a season that feels confusing right now. Someone who needs to hear that the silence isn't absence. Someone who needs to know the fire has an eye on it the entire time. Send it to them this morning. This is the Stoic Path. And whatever season you are walking through right now, it is not wasted.